Hey everybody, welcome to this episode. You're going to be really blessed, probably a little bit challenged, depending on your perspective, your philosophy, your understanding on educating your children. And so in this particular episode, Liz and I are going to talk about developing a philosophy, really a godly philosophy for educating your children. Be blessed as you listen. All right, so this is a really important topic this day and age. In the last couple of years, have made this become something that people, they need to know more about. And I think that our listeners want to hear what we have to say about some of these things. Some of them may not want to hear some of this after we say it, but before we get into it, we should preface this because we're going to talk about just in general, really about schooling and developing the right thinking, the right philosophy about educating your children, because it is an important thing to educate your children. Before we get into it, we should go ahead and preface this by saying that we love all people and we honor all people in their decision to do what they feel is best for their family, whether in their children, whether that's going to a public school, sending them to a public school, a private school, homeschooling them. I think the only non-respectable thing is to give your children no education.
Right.
It's a shame when then there are in this, and I've met several that they don't teach their kids how to read and write. Well, you are handicapped. You're going to handicap your child, even if you don't want your kid involved with anything in any part of the world system, and you only want them to stick with the Lord. Well, how are they going to read their Bible, right? So You have to educate your kids on some level. It's a right thing to do. But we're going to give some pretty strong thoughts and opinions about this that I believe are it's not just like Kentology and Lizology. These are things that I really truly believe are biblical ideas that need to be reinstituted into the families. And with all this being said, people have different situations that they come across because of their situation. They might be a single mom, single parent, single dad. We know single dads, and they're doing everything they can.
That's right.
And they're forced to basically to send their kids to public school because they don't have another option. And listen, we bless those people that are in that decision, in that situation. We bless their home and their children. But we're just going to share some things that I think will really be helpful to help people make the best decision that they can, or at the very least, if they're doing something different than what they really want because their circumstances currently are really challenging, they at least need to have their eyes opened up to the reality of the world that we're living in.
Right. Yeah. And circumstances we should never allow that to dictate what it is that we want. I think when we want something, especially in regards to educating our children, then we can when we know what we want, then we can start making the adjustments that we need to do.
There could be a time period before you're able to do that.
A huge time period.
You should start to work that direction.
But start working that way. Yeah. So it goes back to this question. Do you currently have a philosophy about educating yourself and or your children? Do you have a philosophy, or are you just going along with the flow? And I would say that for me, back before we got married and things, I would just go with the flow. It was what I knew to do. And although I was familiar with private school and homeschooling, that wasn't a part of my life ever.
Right.
And
or versus me, it was a huge part of my life.
Right. Yeah. And so I actually, it goes back to, I didn't have any philosophy on education other than this is what I thought. You get your kid to a certain age, you send them to school, they go to school all the time, and then they graduate and they continue to go to school, and then they live their life.
Yeah.
That is just the flow. I handicapped myself because I didn't even look outside of any other option. That was the only option. And I think as we have gone, well, you've helped me to see, you challenged me actually in this place, is your philosophy. Actually, I didn't have a philosophy, so that's the first thing. And then second,
you did, it just wasn't intentional.
it wasn't an intentional philosophy.
Right.
And then why? Why do you want, and what is it that you particularly want as far as education is concerned for your children? And it would go back to, I thought, if they didn't go to a formal education, a schooling system, that they would grow up and be dumb and not be beneficial or helpful to society. And that's so wrong.
It's very wrong, right?
That's
Right.
narrow-minded or single-mindedness to think that there's only one way to get to a particular place. And that is a beautiful thing.
Which, when you're talking about Jesus, we're supposed to be very
That's right.
single-minded,
That's
right?
right.
He's the only way.
He is.
But if
the
you're
only-
talking about things within the realm of the earth, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right?
That's right.
As it's been said. Yeah, so we have to be open to understanding and thinking some different ways about it. And the bottom line is, this is what people don't understand, is that the government is not responsible for your children's education.
And actually, if you are. Yeah.
You are responsible for your children's education, not the government. I'm not saying you can't send your kids to a public school. I'm not coming down on you for that. What I am saying, though, is that the government is not responsible for how your child turns out. And if you leave them responsible for how your child turns out, if you hold to, which if you're listening to this podcast, you probably do, if you hold to Judeo-Christian ethics and morals, you are going to have a battle on your hands if you leave it up to the government, because the government right now, the way that they are going about and educating, it's not based anymore from a Christian biblical perspective. It is from a worldly perspective, and it's not just education, it's indoctrination.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody that doesn't believe that, you probably are either too stubborn to think differently, or you are so indoctrinated yourself that you can't see it. But I think more people are becoming aware of this because of the last, 2.5 years of
That's
dealing
right.
with the after effects during and the after effects of COVID, and what this has done, and watching small town public school systems be completely asinine in their thinking. And I'm trying to hold it together to not be livid, because these are our next generation being raised. But the good thing about what came about that is that eyes were opened up. But the thing is that what people have to understand is that when it comes to the public education system, and you're not going to have a hard time telling from this podcast that I am not for public education. I went to public school, and it was in a much milder time. We graduated, both of us, in 2000. And so it was a little bit milder time, but there were still things that worked there that really were not of God. But I did learn some things. There was some benefit. It wasn't all bad.
Right.
But what people don't understand is that indoctrination has been happening in our school system for safely 100 years, safely. And it is part of a communist manifesto that has been written to indoctrinate our children so that the future generations will come under bondage. That is the plan and ploy of the devil. And if Christians don't take back the responsibility for the education of their own children, we will lose our country. It's basically, barring a miracle from God, which is what we're believing for, our country is already lost. And what people don't understand is that for a long time, for example, civics has been being removed from the schools. And what is in place there are forms of history, or watered down versions of civics. When I say civics, I'm talking about the Constitution. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about real, true American history, right. Real, true history about the natives and the pilgrims and what that looked like. Anyways, I'm not trying to get into all the history of it, but there's so much that's not being taught. And there are other perverted versions of history that is being taught that is not accurate, or it's being taught from one perspective. But that's truly, right. History means his story. And so it's not being taught from God's perspective. And what's being ingrained into children today concerning how our government functions, they have to believe that socialism is okay, because we are seeing that right now with college-age kids, to where they're saying we want socialism. And I'm thinking, you knuckleheads, you have no idea. Go and study. Hitler was a socialist. Many of these leaders, they were communistic, they were socialistic, they were dictators, but they had philosophies that brought the masses under bondage and caused millions and millions and millions of people to die. Cuba was is a socialist country, and Cuba's killed who knows how many people. Look at the guy from Venezuela. Venezuela
Right.
went from being the number 5 economy in the Western Hemisphere to at one point to now they're probably at the very lowest because of socialism.
Right.
And now you can't even buy, a loaf of bread for, it's like, $8 or something, and people don't even make enough money. So that's the results of socialism. And so anyways, all of those kind of thoughts and ideas that once were like, this is absurd and us Americans would never do it. Now our children are believing this stuff. Why? Because they've been indoctrinated.
Right.
And then you go on to the college campuses. Listen, if you're going to send your kids to college, send them to a Christian college. Who cares if they get a scholarship somewhere else? What is their future worth?
Right.
Is it worth saving $20, $30, $40, $50,000? I mean, you have to hear the Lord on these things, but I'm just telling you, there are Christian colleges that really work to educate at a very high level concerning math and science, things that are very important to our society. We need good doctors and nurses and engineers and all of that. We need that. But what we don't need is those people to come out of this incubation of college believing these completely anti-biblical ideas. There are plenty of Christian colleges in this country. Send your kids to them. Believe God for the money to send your kids to them if that's what it takes if they don't get a scholarship. And that's the road that they're headed down. But pardon my 7-minute tangent there. But this comes back to we have to take responsibility for our kids' education, because academia has been attacked by the enemy. And it's because when you can get people to think different, you'll get them to believe different, and you will get them to act different. And so when you go and you look at the way that our schools handled the whole COVID situation, I'm not saying our school and our town in particular, and I get that everybody had battles that they were dealing with and whatever, but it all comes back to Big Brother, because you've got Big Brother that will not fund and will cut off funding if these local schools don't do what they are telling them to do. And I'm not even going to get into the nonsense that took place. We all see it and understand it. Now we have more kids that are homeschooling than ever before in the history of our country. And you know what? Hats off to you parents. You might have been forced into it. You might have felt forced into it, but you're doing a good thing for your children. You're doing a good thing because you're taking charge of their education, because it is your responsibility, flat out, for what they know, why they know it, how they know it, where they know it, and what they're going to do with what they know.
So this goes back to then developing a philosophy on your own and asking yourself, well, first off, you have to take responsibility for educating your children. It is our responsibility as parents to not rely on anybody else to educate our children.
Right.
We should educate
This doesn't
them.
mean you can't have a teacher for them.
That's
this just
right.
means that you're responsible for what teacher they have.
Correct.
Yes.
And what books they're learning from.
That's right.
And the public school setting, there isn't a choice of what they get to learn. There is a set of books, and these are the books that they're going to learn from.
And many of those books are teaching critical race theory, which is flat out garbage. It's reverse racism is what it is. It's nasty. And then you've got sex education being taught. Sorry, I'll shut up after this. You have sex education being taught to younger kids, and they're teaching about transgenderism and who are you, what gender are you, these things.
You're free to choose.
Sex should be taught to the children by their parents anyways. But I mean, there's a lot of garbage that's going on. And if you are putting your kids in school, you are in public schools, you're potentially going to have to fight those battles. So know that going in. If you feel like that's the right decision, we are for you. Whoever you are, we are for you. We are for your children's education, but take charge of it. Know what's going on.
Right. And if your kids are in a public school setting, are you fully aware of what is being taught to them, of what they are hearing, of who it's being involved? That's part of taking responsibility, is that you are responsible for what they are receiving as education. So with that being said, how do you develop your own or the philosophy?
Right.
What does that look like? And so it's asking yourself, what do you care about? And sometimes we have to remember this, that we're the ones who chose to have children, and they are our responsibility.
That's right.
And yes, things happen, and we make choices, but what are we choosing? Because we only have so much time with our children. We get 18 years. That was put to me. You have 18 summers. When you break it down like that, that's not a lot of time. You have 18. And then in that sense, you only have then, if you're putting your children in a traditional school sense, you only have 18 summers where you are the pure main influence. And then you're going to work sometimes, and then they're at home or whatever. So you make choices. We all make choices about what because it peels back even further. What do I want? Do I want the big house? Do I want the nice cars? Do I want all the
sacrifice sometimes?
And if I want those things, then that means not only that I have to work, but the spouse has to work, or you're a single parent and you are the sole provider. So it's making choices, but then also choosing to sacrifice. And to me, parenting is a sacrificial act, because you made a choice to birth children, to help populate the earth, to sow into future generations. And it didn't just come with having a child and then passing that responsibility to somebody else. It's saying, no, I am responsible. I have 18 summers where I get to choose, where I get to help empower my kids, where I get to be the first mention, where I get to be the one who helps them form their philosophies and form their ideologies and tell them what is truth.
Form their identity.
Yes, and what isn't truth, and be their, help be that guiding. Light and post for them, help in pointing them towards the direction of the Lord, helping teach them that the Bible is the true thing. It is where we should gain our philosophy. And quite frankly, if you look in the Word of God, it says that as parents, you are to train up the child in the way that they should go. And that we are called, to teach them and to instruct them. In Deuteronomy 6, it talks about teaching them at the table.
Right.
And infusing morals and things into them. And a lot of times as parents, we don't feel powerful to do that because we haven't done it for ourselves.
You better get powerful then.
Then that's what I'm saying. Take charge. Begin to ask yourself the question, what do I want in life? And what am I willing to lay down in order to pick up the greater? And I will say this so much. God honors your choice, honors that choice. If you're willing to do the hard thing, take responsibility and say, it is not just my responsibility, but it is my greatest privilege to raise my children the way that I believe that the Bible is teaching them to be raised, that as you do that, which means sacrifice and humility on our part, that God honors it and that He blesses it. And you will see even greater things that come from that choice than the choice of working and trying to strive to get all the things that you think that they want. Like you're saying, like, oh, I want to give them the nice clothes, and I want to give them the car, and I want to give them the best education, and we think that we're helping them when in all reality, we're not helping them. The thing that will help them is that we are present and that we are active and that we are communicating with them the important things, and then we're teaching them. We're not putting them into this box saying you have to, yes, you need to read and write, but it's training them the way that they should go. How are they bent? How were they created? How do they think? And it's leaning them that direction. It's pushing them that direction. It's teaching them how to be free thinkers, how to know and how to think and how to ask questions and how to find the resources and how to seek the Lord and how to gain wisdom. And then practically speaking, it's teaching them how to do practical things. This is how you cook, and this is how you clean, and that you should make your bed, and all those things.
This is so good, and I feel like we need to make another podcast on this because it's such a big issue. There's so much that we don't have time to talk about on this particular episode. But everything you're saying is exactly right on. So when you talk about developing because we're talking about this time, developing a philosophy for educating your children, that philosophy has to be, number one, it has to be rooted in how God thinks. And so part of how God thinks is that the parents are responsible for their children's education. Number one, first and foremost, it is not anybody else's job, period. And that is very difficult for some people to think about. And that was something that you had to come back, because I was adamantly, from before we were married, there was a couple things that I said, we will do it this way. And I didn't go about telling you that the right way, but I was like, we will homeschool our children.
That's right.
Which has been a huge thing for us, because you weren't really prepared for that, but you wanted to be honoring to me. And I wasn't even honoring to you and asking you how you felt about it, but that was just where we both were. Now you see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're down to teaching the last one how to read. It's still a lot of work. But we made sacrifices because we could have put our kids in school. You could have gone and worked as a nurse, which you went and did 4 years of college and got your BSN. Right. And you could have went and worked as well as me doing what I'm doing. And we could have made a lot more money.
Right.
But that's not what we value. We value them getting what God wants them to have. And so that's has to be part of your philosophy, is not only, okay, number one, they have to have education God's way, which means that I'm responsible for it. Okay, so if I'm responsible for their education, how are they getting educated? Because it's not evil to send your kids to public school.
No.
You just have to be aware of the evil that is there.
That's right.
You have to be aware of what's going on behind closed doors. And if you have peace about it, then that's between you and the Lord. You know, right. Nobody else is your judge. That's between you and God. Maybe you have peace about sending them to private school and you feel like you can afford that. Then that's fine. But there can be a bunch of nonsense in private schools too. Right. I know, because I've been part of them. I know. But then if you're looking at homeschooling, I mean, those are basically your three options for schooling. There's blessing and challenges involved with all those. Our kids were not really allowed to be involved in, or couldn't be involved in sports. Not they weren't allowed to be. They played, T-ball and stuff like that. But community, but as far as like for the school, we weren't involved in the school. It never happened for them. But that wasn't a priority to us. But part of how we were able to develop a lot of that philosophy, and I think this is where we need to end, and we need to make another podcast about homeschooling, because it's a big thing for people.
It is.
But this is what came down for us. What direction, and part of how you make a philosophy. So it has to be that we know that God's ordained us as parents. He's empowered us as parents.
That's right.
To be responsible for that. Then it's how are they going to get that? But then also included in with all of that is, what bent does your child have? Mm-hmm. If you're raising a rocket scientist, and you know it, and you'll know. You can't force a kid into that, right? Or probably out of it. Versus if you're raising one that's going to be more ministry minded, because that flows in our family. We've got some of that in our family, and then we've got ones that will work with their hands and ones that are more artistic. Then you develop their education to fit them. We need to make another podcast, and we need to talk about homeschooling and how homeschooling really fits that versus some of the other models of educating your children. How it will help raise them up to be the ones that God has called them to be.
That's right.
Yeah, amen. So this is good stuff.
That's good.
Really, really good, and meant to be helpful. And the listeners just have to forgive my tangent. Hopefully you didn't turn me off during that. But listen, man, you go and do your study, do your research on what the enemy has done through governmental systems, and it's always wrapped in a nice bow. There are so many benefits to different types of things that go on in our country. Everybody likes free stuff. Everybody likes convenient stuff. But what's free and convenient is not always the best thing.
That's right.
And so we just have to weigh those things out. Set our value system
right. It's not free. It costs.
Oh no, it costs.
It costs a lot.
It might be free at the moment, but it costs us in the long run.
That's right.
That's right. So bless you. And I just pray that you got blessed by this podcast, and we'll share it with people that will really, really need to hear it.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. Share it with your friends and on your socials. For more information about Ward Ministries, check out wardmen.org. If this podcast is encouraging you on your marriage and family, we want to hear about it. Email us at info@wardmen.org, and make sure you keep your eye out weekly for the latest podcast on marriage and family.